Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Okay. I tend to talk fast when I give presentations, so I'm going to try to get us back on track. So my name is Jordan Angel. I'm here presenting results from Volcano Platforms. We're an early stage startup CFD company. Oh, I should be closer to the mic, right? All right. So this is done. This is work done with my colleagues Aditi Gate, Gaetan Kenway, Menlong Wong, and Chen Kirs, as well as Neil Ashton, who is a huge help for us, especially with all the AutoCFD experience he has. We all came from kind of the aerospace side. So I'm going to try to go a bit quick here. I just want to talk about, I'm going to introduce like who we are, like kind of what our objective is, and then I'll show a few results that kind of aren't in the dashboard or the submission, stuff that you wouldn't see otherwise. And I'm probably going to gloss over stuff that you wouldn't see in the submission or the dashboard. All right, so we're an early stage startup company. Our objective has really been from the beginning to reduce resource requirements for LES so that you can have industrial LES as a routine day-to-day task, right? So we do that by having very low memory requirements. We're a Cartesian octree-based code. We run very large simulations on a very small amount of cards. So like, as an example here, I give you a capability of like 500 million grid cells I run on a 2 GPU workstation pretty much daily. We can go up to 3 billion cells on just 8 cards. And these are cheap cards too. I want to emphasize that. Like there's 2 things I want to emphasize. One is very low memory cost, and the fact that we can use very cheap GPUs. So we can scale very large problems not using scientific cards like A100s or H100s, but cheap cards like 4090s or L40S, right? This is really what we think is required if you're going to make LES usable by an engineer day to day, right? That's the idea. And the fact that we can get reasonable turnaround times without scaling up to dozens of GPUs, which you see, a lot of vendors will boast about quick turnaround times. And then they scale that up to 32, 64, or even like 128 GPUs, right? So we don't think that's practical for like a day-to-day work from an engineer. So the idea is low resource costs with still quick turnaround times. So that's sort of our motivation why we started this. Right, so walk time is not everything. Next, the reason for doing this is we really want to accelerate this sort of iterative process of meshing, solving, post-processing. Then you modify your grid. You solve, you mesh, solve, post-process. This iterative loop needs to be done very quickly. Once you kind of converge on a grid topology you're happy with, because we're octree mesh, we define like refinement zones. Once you have your refinement zones set up, you just need a single parameter, which is going to be your wall spacing. And then using that single number, you can do a consistent grid refinement study. Right? Once I have all that configured, I just change this one number, and I get an automatic grid refinement study, which is important in a case where you don't have experimental data. And like in this workshop, obviously, we can be guided by the experimental data. But if you don't have that, then you have to have someone to have confidence in your results. And then doing a consistent grid refinement study is really the only way to do that. Okay, so now I'll talk just a bit about the code. So as I said, we're a Cartesian octree code for GPU. We do a burst boundary to handle complex geometries. Another thing I want to emphasize, we are a compressible Navier-Stokes solve. So that means we have an acoustic CFL limit. So our time step is going to be about 100 times smaller than a lot of the other presentations you see. This is important to keep in mind when we talk about these turnaround times, right? Very low dissipated numerics. Everything's explicit. All of our time stepping is done explicitly. This is really important when you want to get the most out of a GPU, right? You have to get parallelized down to the cell level. So we have CUDA threads operating on individual cells, which is really what you need if you're going to squeeze as much out of these GPUs as possible. Equilibrium model, algebraic model, and then, yeah, so again, we're a compressible code. So this is an all-Mach formulation. We do everything from, this is probably the lowest Mach number we do, this down to like 0.1. And then we do other applications even up to like Mach 5 or Mach 6. Okay, so with that, I'll just talk about briefly, we did case 1 and case 2. This was our mesh topology for the Windsor body case, which looks a bit odd with this giant wake block behind. The reason we had this topology was this was actually part of another project that we did with Neil, where you had many variations of the Windsor body at different ride heights, and we wanted to keep a single mesh fixed. Since we used that as a validation, we decided we'll just submit those results. I'm showing the convergence table here for the number of grid cells we have for this G1, G2, G3. Our minimum grid spacing for this goes like 1 millimeter, 3/4, and about 0.625. The number of grid cells for this, the G2 is the one we're going to use for the remainder of our validation. That's about 300 million grid cells. And it only takes about 15 minutes per CTU. And that's on a single G5 node on AWS. Okay, so this I kind of want to go through quickly because this is stuff that you can find on the dashboard. We have a CP offset, but the shape is well predicted for the base pressure. Something that's a bit more interesting that I didn't get to show because of the submission, or I didn't submit, I should say, is so as Charlie pointed out earlier, there's a bit of a bump after that transition there on the suction peak. So that seems to be present in the Vreeman model, but not in the dynamic Smagorinsky. And I'll show another example of a difference between these two for case 2 as well. And then another thing we observed when we were running the Windsor, I don't know if the colors are coming through that well, but there's an intermittent transition that kind of happens on the hood in our simulations. I was kind of curious if anyone else had observed this. So you'll see transition on the hood, it'll kind of go away. So you'll see these transition lines start to vanish here in a minute, and it'll become completely laminar, and then it kind of comes back. So it seems to be quite sensitive to that. So you see here it's almost completely clean, and then it just needs a little bit of a perturbation, and then that will come back. Okay, so are we seeing that yet? I feel like I'm really pressed here. Just come on. There it goes. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so now it's starting to transition again. So it kind of goes through that. I didn't know if anyone else had observed that. I thought that was a reasonably kind of interesting observation. All right, so differences in subgrid-scale models here on CP. It seems to be a bit cleaner for dynamic Smagorinsky, although at the base it actually looks a bit less accurate, but interesting to note. And then for the other cut, the Z cut, there's a similar sort of effect where Vreeman has this kind of diversion here after that peak, but the dynamic Smagorinsky doesn't. But then again in the back, the Vreeman somehow appears to be more accurate. All right, so I think that's about all I want to say for Windsor. And then I'll move to case 2, DrivAer. So for this, I submitted, I think we submitted 2 millimeter. I'll show you results for 2 millimeter and 1 millimeter. That's our finest grid spacing. So when I say like a 2 millimeter or 1 millimeter grid, that means this deepest red here is what's the finest grid spacing, and everything else is just a factor of 2 coarser, right, for all these different levels. So these simulations we ran on a single server node that has 8 L40Ss. The 2 millimeter is 375 million cells, and the 1 millimeter is 535 million cells. Wall time to do a 2.5 second simulation for both of these. So 10.5 hours for the 375 million, and then 29 hours to do 2.5 seconds on the 535 million. Okay. If you were to do this with like an AWS spot pricing, it would cost you about $70 to do that simulation, and about $190 to do that simulation. So we really want to like, in industrial CFD, someone has to foot the bill, and no one often reports like how much it would cost in dollars to do a simulation. So we're trying to advocate for that. So we want to provide that information here. And then I just have a kind of a nice picture of the instantaneous skin friction. Okay, CP, most of these CPs all look the same. Most everybody gets it pretty accurately. The only thing I wanted to point out was, oh, my fonts have gone terrible. Okay, so I have to explain this. So this turquoise line is the 1 millimeter with Vreeman, and the burgundy line is the 1 millimeter with dynamic Smagorinsky. You can see on the top center line, basically everywhere it's exactly the same. The only difference would be kind of at the boot, where you have a peak in CP for the Vreeman model, but you don't have that for the dynamic Smagorinsky. So based on that, we choose the dynamic Smagorinsky for the rest of our validation. This is 2 millimeter and 1 millimeter dynamic Smagorinsky. On the upper body center line, there's no difference between 2 millimeter and 1 millimeter. On the bottom, where the geometry is a bit more complicated, there are differences. You actually get something with the 1 millimeter here. You're getting more accurate, although somehow the resolution got destroyed. But I think in the uploaded version of these charts, that'll be more clear. Okay, next, let's see. I can just play this while I talk. I don't really have much to say on the movies. I can just kind of let that play, although it looks atrocious. So what I'm showing here is predicting the actual delta using the dynamic Smagorinsky. So the top is the time history for CD for the 2 millimeter grid, 2A and 2B. So that delta is about 0.094. And then when you refine, you're getting a bit closer to the experimental delta. So that delta is about 0.017. In my table here, I've got the differences for dynamic Smagorinsky and Vreeman for all the grid levels we did. I think the 0.094 is in the acceptance criteria. So we're in a point where we can get a respectable delta in about 10 hours on a relatively fine mesh. Okay, what's next? This is just a plot of CP showing the effect of the front wheel deflector, but I think everyone here is pretty well familiar with what that guy does. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, so I wanted to show our results for our new Octree mesh solver. I really want to emphasize how we're trying to reduce the resource cost to make this very practical for an engineer at a workstation to do large-scale LES simulations. Because of the low memory requirement, we can do hundreds of millions of grid points on a very low number of GPUs. And let's see, overnight costs on the order of $100 to do these sort of simulations. And then I think I can conclude there. And then I want to think that, you should look at these results as being very preliminary. None of us had background in AutoCFD. The committee has been very kind and patient, answering a lot of questions for us, so I really appreciate them. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you guys. It's been a very good experience for us. And then I think I can stop here.